Hi everyone, this is Mike with Bad Goblin Games. I want to talk to you a bit about how we handle movement in Ages of Conflict. Movement is an important aspect of the game, perhaps just as important, maybe as more important than how we handle morale or command and control in a game. I think anyone who's played a war game has lost a game just because of movement, whether that was your units wouldn't, or they're not where they were supposed to be when you want them to be there for whatever reason, dealing with terrain, or the unit was pinned down, or you just, bad decision, lack of foresight, right? It happens. So for us, movement, it was trying to find the right balance between simulating reality and also keeping in mind that this is a game. And so we wanted to make sure that the movement doesn't slow down the game, that the game keeps moving forward. So the first thing I want to talk about then is basically when you're moving a unit. Actually, let me just kind of make some room here. A unit. So I guess the first basic rule here is that your units are they have real free range of movement. Okay, so as long as there's not an enemy around this unit, then this unit is more or less free to move however it wants, so long as no part of the unit moves more than its permitted move. Okay, so let's just say that for this turn, this unit can move up to 10 centimeters. That means I can just kind of shift over here if I want to. I can just turn facing if I want to. Basically, if there's not an enemy around me, then I have much more freedom of movement. Once a unit, or say an enemy, is within a certain range of me, then we restrict movement a bit more. So now at this point, since I have an enemy in a close proximity to me, I don't want to necessarily keep that free range of movement, because then we're creating all sorts of loopholes in the game. So at this point, we are now restricted to either moving front or back. And this means that I may have to, since I can't just slide over and do this number, I may have to say, wheel front or wheel back if I want to engage an enemy. So that's the first kind of basic rule of movement, is that so long as there's not an enemy nearby, you have real free range of movement. Once an enemy closes in on you, we have to tighten down those move rules a bit, just to stop the try to close up any kind of loopholes or people taking advantage of the rules and creating, say, unsportsmanlike situations. Now, with all that said, there are really three factors that influence how far your unit can move. The first off is the order your movement's given. The order that you issue to your unit, whether that's march orders, charge orders. The second is the type of ground we're moving over, whether it's, say, smooth ground like this or rough ground like these woods, and also the formation that your unit's in. So let's talk about each of those in a bit more detail, starting with the orders. So we have two different orders available to us, and these orders ultimately determine the pace that your unit can move. There are three paces available in the game. There's an ordinary pace, a quick pace, and a charge pace. These are all static paces. So we're not putting you in a situation where you're taking, say, for every centimeter of movement I'm moving in rough ground, it's going to cost me 2 centimeters, or while I'm moving from here, I have to half my movement or anything like that. It's the pace you're moving at is a static pace. It's always going to be that pace. There's no real math involved. No one likes math in a game, or at least I don't like math in a game. So march orders, when we're on march orders, our units can move up to their ordinary pace or quick pace. They can move up to their ordinary pace, say, over rough ground, such as like this broken field or these woods. Your ordinary pace is equal to your move attribute. So this infantry, for example, their move attribute is 5. That means their ordinary pace is 5. This heavy cavalry, their move is 6. That means their ordinary pace is 6. If I'm dealing with, say, light cavalry or fast cavalry, they're going to have a move attribute of 9, meaning their ordinary pace is 9. So march means I can move over rough ground I can move up to my ordinary pace. If I'm moving over smooth ground, which is something like this, and smooth ground should be the majority of the battlefield. So it's basically, whereas rough ground is basically anything that impedes movement, smooth ground is ground that does not impede movement. So when I'm moving over smooth ground on march orders, I can move up to my quick pace. My quick pace is double the move. So this infantry unit, since their move is 5, that means their quick pace is double, which means it's 10. This heavy cavalry, their move is 6. That means their quick pace is 12. Charge orders, a unit can move up to 3 times their move. So again, infantry with a move of 5, that means they can go 15. Heavy cavalry such as this with a move of 6, it means they can go 18. Light cavalry, they have a base of 9. That means on charge orders, they can go up to 27 centimeters. So they can really move from A to B as quick as possible. Now, charge orders can only be used over smooth ground. You cannot use charge orders in rough ground at all. So let's talk about a couple situations in which you might use one of these orders. So march orders is kind of your all-around, move and attack. So if I give march orders to this unit, they can move into hand combat, they can move and then later on the turn use, say, slings or bows. So we have a lot of options with the march orders. Now, specifically in regard to, say, combat, the benefit of using a march order is if this unit has thrown weapons. So we're not talking about bows or slings. We're talking about muscle-driven thrown weapons, javelins, hand axes, something like that. They can move, and then they're going to kind of stop just before they get to that enemy unit, and they are given a free attack. So this is an attack that takes place out of the normal combat sequence. They get a free attack to throw those weapons, and then they can continue on into hand combat. Now, with charge orders, charge orders is the unit. So there's 2 reasons you'd really use a charge order. One is if you want to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. The other is as a shock tactic. So let's just we have heavy cavalry. So this is like your cataphract, right? This is heavily armored horse, heavily armored, knight or warrior, maybe with a crouched lance or overhead spear or a cavalry spear, whatever. Very intimidating, okay? And then we have infantry. So this cavalry, their goal wasn't necessarily to charge into the infantry and just slaughter them. Their real goal was just to make them leave, make them quit the field, run away, rout, whatever term you want to use. If I can do that, if I can charge this enemy and they simply flee the field, not only have they done their part to further victory, they've done it without taking a casualty, and now they can turn and do something else in the game. So that's the real goal here. So let's just kind of quickly work through that. These units have a attribute called presence, and we talk about presence a bit more in the units video. If you haven't watched it, I would suggest go watching it after this. But real quickly, this unit has a presence of 4. This unit has a presence of 2. If the unit with a higher presence charges a unit with lower presence, so in this case, they have 4, they have 2, they charge. Now the unit with the less presence, they are obligated to make a command check. So we're rolling 2d10, and our goal here is 1 success. We need one of these dice to be a 6 or more. If they fail that check, this unit flees the field. They're gone. In this case, they passed. I rolled a 1 and a 7. I only needed one of those to be a 6 or more. So they don't flee in the face of those knights. But that's why you would use a charge pace. Now, there is one disadvantage to using that charge pace. This is not a pace that was intended to be maintained for a long period of time. Your units at this point are basically running. So it's a pace that's difficult to maintain over a long distance. You have hundreds of soldiers in that unit moving at different speeds or carrying heavy equipment. There's fear, there's adrenaline, all sorts of factors that are going into it. And there's just a real good chance that from the time they start here until to the point they get here, they are not going to be that same cohesive unit. Okay, so to simulate that, if this unit moves at a charge pace and they do not come into contact with an enemy, they must make a command check. If they fail the check, they are inflicted with a condition called disorganized. And disorganized basically just reflects a lack of cohesion within the unit. And really where that comes into play is hand combat. So if this unit, say, charges, they become disorganized, now they are countercharged by an enemy, or just an enemy hits them before they can become disorganized, they're going to be a fairly severe disadvantage in combat. So it's not an order that you just kind of want to use lightly. So that's how orders influence movement. The next thing we'll talk about is ground. So again, we have smooth ground and we have, say, rough ground. Smooth ground should dominate the battlefield. While you're moving over smooth ground, if your unit has march orders, they can go up to their quick pace. If they have charge orders, they can go up to their charge pace. Where it gets a little more challenging is when you're dealing with rough ground. So we'll just kind of use this little felt pad thing here, and this can simulate, say, an unplowed field or broken ground, whatever you want to use it for. And we're just going to use one unit here for our one base for ease of use. So the basic rule with rough ground is that anytime you're moving through or entering or into rough ground, your unit is limited to a maximum of its ordinary pace. So let me show how that works. So we have infantry here. So let's say they start off 3 centimeters away. They move. After 3 centimeters, they come into contact with this rough ground. At that point, their movement is immediately reduced to a maximum of their ordinary pace, which is 5. Since they've already moved 3, that means they can only move 2 more centimeters. So if they moved 4 centimeters and hit the rough ground, that means they can only move 1 more centimeter. If I start my turn in rough ground, again, I'm limited to my ordinary pace. That means I can only move 5 centimeters. Now, let's say they were on charge orders and they were, let's just say, 7 centimeters away. I move 7 centimeters. I come into contact with this rough ground. At that point, my move is reduced to a maximum of my ordinary pace. Since I've already moved 7, that unit's movement for this turn comes to an immediate end. So that's how ground affects movement. I would recommend that you and your opponent talk about how to classify ground before you begin the game. Sometimes it's really obvious, woods, going up a hill. It's usually pretty obvious what kind of ground that you have, though sometimes it's beneficial to talk to your opponent and make sure you both agree that this is smooth ground. For whatever reason, this little patch over here is rough ground, whatever. Have that conversation. That way there's no misunderstandings as you go through the game. So the final consideration we have with movement are formations. We have multiple formations in the game just to allow your units to deal with different situations. Now, the most common formation we have in the game is a standard line formation. There's no really any inherent bonuses or penalties that come along with this. Or I guess I should say, we don't have anything stipulated in the book, though, or in the rules. Though, just by virtue of extending the line, then you are reducing the chance for an enemy to outflank you. And if this unit has missile weapons, then they can bring more of that firepower to bear. Whereas, say, if they're like in a column formation, if this unit has missile weapons, then they can't do that, because really only this front unit's going to be able to use those missiles. So this is a column formation. This is a formation that you would typically see in black powder warfare, specifically with Napoleonics. This is a formation that has two advantages to it. The first is that if you are moving at a charge pace and you don't come in, you don't come into contact with an enemy, there is less of a chance that this unit will become disorganized. The second is if you use this formation to move into hand combat, you're going to get some bonuses on that first round of combat, simply because this is basically hitting like a hammer. There's a lot of momentum going forward with this formation. Now the downside, as I just mentioned, is that it's not really a formation that you want to use if you want to project missile weapon firepower into the field, because really only this front unit will be able to take advantage of the missile weapons. We have several defensive formations available in the game. First up is a shield wall formation, and basically what this is first off, the units must be equipped with shields. It's a shield wall, and those shields are used to do just that. The soldiers here take those shields and create an overlapping wall in front of them for defensive purposes. So this is a good defensive formation. It's a little on the rigid side, and so the unit is restricted to an ordinary pace. So it's not a formation that you're going to adopt and then move quickly around the battlefield. Similar to a shield wall is Testudo. The main difference between a shield wall and Testudo is that not only is that you're not only is that unit creating a wall in front of them, they're also putting their shields on their sides, overhead, trying to close up as many gaps as possible. This is a pure defensive formation. This is a formation that is popularized with Roman armies. It's basically used as protection against missile fire. But as with the shield wall, you are limited to your ordinary pace. And it's not really a formation that you're going to use while you're in hand combat. You can, but you're going to have some penalties to hand combat and ranged weapons while attacking out of that formation. I mean, this is really just for defensive purposes, the Testudo. The next formation is the square. Again, this is kind of goes back to black powder warfare. So with a square, when we have a standard formation, a standard unit like this, it has a defined front, rear, and flanks. And typically these units are going to be vulnerable to being attacked on from behind and on the flanks. So again, this is close order fighting. These guys here in the middle, they're kind of stuck. It's loud. It's pretty scary. I mean, so they have really limited field of vision, so they don't really know what's going on beside them or around them. So if all of a sudden they get hit from the rear, as far as they're concerned, their entire army has been outflanked and on the verge of disaster, right? So and that's sort of a danger if you're dealing with an enemy who's using, say, fast cavalry. So what you might see is a unit adopt a square formation, and what this does is get rid of that defined rear and those defined flanks. So basically every side of the unit is considered to be a frontage. So now they can attack from all sides, and they're not in any danger of being attacked from the rear or from the flanks. Next up is the phalanx formation. This is a pretty old formation. It goes back to at least as far back as Mesopotamia. So this is a difficult formation to deal with in hand combat, though it's a rather rigid formation, and it's going to have some pretty severe penalties when dealing with a rough ground. It's not really a formation that deals well with moving over rough ground. Basically, the exact opposite of the phalanx is a skirmishing or a loose formation. So what this is instead of these soldiers being, shoulder to shoulder, shoulder to shoulder fighting, now we're dealing with, they're spread out. They're in a loose formation. So this is a formation you'd probably see a lot with fast cavalry, archers, slingers. When we're dealing with, say, World War II and sci-fi, virtually everyone at that point is considered to be a skirmisher. So you can see here we have this small base of sci-fi troops, and you can see they're kind of spread out. So by default, they're in a skirmishing formation. Flyers, such as these Hawk Riders, by default, they're going to be in a skirmishing formation. So there's some benefits associated with skirmishing. It's going to give you much better field of vision. You don't really have that defined rear and defined flank. You can move faster. So if you're moving over rough ground, you can move at a faster pace than if you could if you're in that tight formation. There are some drawbacks to it. This is not a formation that you want to get hit with while you're in hand combat. It's not going to fare well. So those are all of the formations we have available. There are some bonuses and penalties to each one. So you really need to consider what formation is right for you, just kind of depending upon the circumstance. The last thing I'll say about formations is that when you're dealing with miniatures, it can be a little challenging to really see what formation they're in. I can look at this and say, okay, they'll be in a line formation. That's easy enough to see. I can put them this way and say, yeah, okay, that's easy enough to see they're in a column. And if I have enough units or enough bases, I can even arrange, some kind of, square to say, okay, they're in a square formation. But some of these you can't really tell, So if I want this unit to go from, say, this tight formation to skirmishing, I don't necessarily want to grab a different base and put it in there to show troops that are spread out. If I want them to adopt a shield wall, I can't really look at those miniatures and say, yep, they're definitely in a shield wall. So we do have these tokens available as reminders. So you don't have to use them. We like to use them just so I can remember that, okay, yep, this unit's in a shield wall. If it's getting attacked, now I can easily look at that token and say, okay, they should get this bonus to their defense because they're in the shield wall. You don't want to adopt a formation and then just forget you're in it, because you went into that formation for a reason. So that's it for formations. All right, well, that's going to do it for how we handle movement in Ages of Conflict. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please check out the other how-to or gameplay videos we have available. You can also join us on Facebook if you have any questions or comments or suggestions. Thank you.